Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. And in fact, today we are going to be culminating the series of live streams that we have been doing the last 8 weeks. This is the 7th in the series, so we took 1 week off. So it's been 8 weeks since we started. And if this is your first time joining us, then welcome. We are most happy that you could join us this afternoon or this evening or wherever it is, whatever time it is you are in the world. If you are watching this after the fact, recorded, then we are happy to have you here to get the final word, as it were, for the series that we've been discussing. And the final word is fulfillment. To be fulfilled and to fulfill. And as you know, earlier in the series, we talked about emptiness and we talked about fullness and the relationship between emptiness and fullness as they relate to oneness, which we followed up with 2 streams, one on separateness and one on connection, connectedness. And if you recall, we launched this whole series in a very practical way. We began with meditation. And we progressed to where we are now. The culmination, the end purpose of all of these live streams and every esoteric practice is this elusive state of fulfillment. To fulfill our purpose, our role, to be, as opposed to not be. Everything that we have been exploring relates to the emptying of our cup and allowing that empty cup to be filled again. And in the filling of that cup, allowing our being to fill us up, for us to be filled with our being and experience that oneness, that connection moment to moment. And it is the connection through the moment, our presence, and that oneness, that being filled with, that feeling of being in our body, in this vessel. A feeling of fullness, a feeling that we are filled. that we are fulfilled. This is a practical, experiential state. This is not theoretical. This is not intellectual. This is not something that we believe. This is something that we experience, that we feel in the moment. If we are first emptied so that we can be filled and be full of the being, that is the road to fulfillment. And so the progression that we have been taking takes into account all of those aspects. Plus, if we are separate, we are feeling separated from our being, then we don't feel filled, and we are not full of our being. We're full of ourselves. We're full of our thoughts and our emotions and our sensations and our reactions and the busy mind and our concerns, and we're thinking about the future, and we're worried about the future, and we're obsessing about the past. We're thinking about what we want or what we don't want. So we're full of ourselves, that which we need to empty in order that we may achieve a state of fulfillment, of being fulfilled. And it is in that state that we can proceed with the works, the words, the actions, the great enterprises, the projects, whatever it is that fills us, fills our belly with the fire, with the passion, the things that we cannot live without, that we cannot imagine ourselves existing without the ability to do in some capacity. Joseph Campbell called this following your bliss. What is our bliss? Well, our bliss is that which fills us with that fire, that passion, that intensity, that energy, and that it radiates out through us when we are in our element, when we are doing that which we identify as our bliss. In a very real way, this series has been offering practical and experiential methodologies to be able to be in that state moment to moment as much as possible, but at the very least, on occasion, when we remember ourselves and we remember to practice, and when we are doing that which we are passionate about, which gives us joy, and it's when we are able to achieve that state in our mundane activities that we remember to surrender, to give ourselves over to that which we allow to fill us and to exist in the fullness of being. However, it must be said that this state, if you have practiced this in any capacity, you know that the state is temporary. You cannot sustain it. Why can't we? Why can't we sustain it? Why are we not always in this deep, uber meditative state of fulfillment where we feel that connection to our innermost and we feel oneness with what we are doing and everything around us through our innermost? And why can't we sustain that? Well, obviously it's because of separation. The oneness that we experience is intermittent, means that we occasionally have that connection. And when we occasionally have that connection, we can occasionally experience that state of oneness and that fullness. And we can intermittently practice in a state of fulfillment toward fulfilling our purpose, our goal, our mission, our bliss. Fulfill the will of our innermost being. But the rest of the time, we are separated. So, in order to remedy this, we must look toward a methodology that allows us to increase the periods of connectedness and decrease the periods of separation. And in order to do that, we must identify and recognize what it is which is causing the separation. What is the interference pattern? If we think of connection like an internet connection, and that connectedness that we seek that allows us to feel that oneness and that fullness, then if we think about it, like an internet connection or a cell phone signal or any type of radio signal, you know that if there's interference, we lose the connection. So we look to what causes the interference. And as it turns out, we don't have to look very hard or very far, because what causes the interference, what causes us to lose our connection, is within. It fills us up, actually. And that is why we said earlier, when we are not full of our being, we're full of ourself, our false self, and the future and the past and all our desires and everything. So that fullness of self and being filled with the worries of physical life and the worries of the personality and the false self and the people around us and politics and job and money and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on and on. We don't have to tell you what you would think about and worry about. You know what you think about and worry about. At least we hope you do. And that's the point. We need a methodology that seeks to permanently empty ourselves of the causes of our separation, permanently reduce that interference pattern. And it's not one pattern, it's many, many, many patterns. Or it's one pattern that's played by many, many, many different entities, our many egos, which we've talked about very often. And the methodology to go about doing this is the AUM of Life, which we've talked about before, but in esoteric terminology and Gnostic terminology, this is referred to as the three factors: sacrifice, death, and birth. And we will unpack how each of those relate to the terminologies that we've been using and how they relate to the AUM of Life in just one moment. But first, we have a comment from our good friend Azazel, who says, while we are in states of fulfillment, the three factors becomes more important in order to maintain the connection. Azazel is already ahead of us. Azazel, you may feel free, my friend, to pop on the live stream if you so choose. We have just posted the links, and there you have it. If you wish to come on and lend your your experience and wisdom on today's topic, or your experience for that matter. In some Gnostic traditions, meaning the lectures that you will find on Glorian, and possibly in the books of Samael, but we mostly recall the discussion of the three factors of sacrifice, death, and birth. Usually, the instructors at Glorian begin with birth, death, and sacrifice. We have a feeling or a sense of why they order them in that way. However, and that our intuition is that they order them in that way because birth is appealing and inviting. It's the least confrontational, it's the least offensive of the three factors. Who doesn't like a newborn baby? Who doesn't identify in some fashion with birth or rebirth, or growth, or becoming a new person, or achieving, or birth is a positive, feel good word. And so we can see why Glorian begins with birth. But birth is actually the last. It's the last factor. And while we appreciate the intention of marketing the three factors to those who may be turned off by the notions contained in them, we tend to focus instead on the AUM of Life and the practical order in which we undertake the three factors. And the first factor is sacrifice. Sacrifice, of course, to most people is a dirty word. The ego doesn't want to sacrifice. The ego hates sacrifice. And for most people who only seek comfort and security, they don't like the idea of sacrifice. And so if you talk about the three factors and you say sacrifice, death, and birth, which is precisely how we presented them in the description of today's live stream, and is precisely the order in which they must be performed, It's the order in the AUM of Life. It's the order in the hero's journey. It's the order in which what unfolded in this series unfolded. We began first with laying a foundation, a very practical foundation of meditation, which is the first thing. You sacrifice your time and energy, and you sacrifice your thoughts. You block out some time, and we follow that up with emptiness, right? Emptying out your cup. That's a sacrifice. And practically speaking, the sacrifice which we are making, the sacrifice of ourself. Ourself is the lowercase s, the person who is speaking to you now, the physical vessel, the mortal vessel, the mortal servant. But that's not to say that this mortal servant needs to do a physical sacrifice. But everything related to the personality, to the ego, desires, and all of that which currently fills us with that false self, all of our egos and their thoughts and concerns and emotions and sensations in our three bodies and five centers, right? Mental center, emotional center, motor, physical, sexual center. The egos fill us with the cacophony of the busy mind and of the rational mind. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going, just like any machine. Once you start it up, it wants to keep going. That's the mechanical law of inertia. It's one of the physical laws of nature. What things tend to want to keep doing what they're already doing. It is essentially laziness, because an object at rest wants to stay at rest, and an object in motion wants to stay in motion. That is the definition of laziness. On the purest level of mechanical nature, called Newton's laws of motion. And the second law is inertia, or is it the first law? I can't remember. We can't remember which, if it's the first or second law, but it's one of the fundamental laws of Newton's laws of motion. Things at rest tend to remain at rest, and things that move tend to keep moving. And so so the way we are, right, we want to keep maintaining that. We want to keep staying at that level, and we want to keep doing what we've always been doing. That's called habitual behavior. Habitual behavior is nothing but inertia applied on the mental, emotional, and motor instinctive sexual plane, the psychological plane, the metaphysical plane of the lower bodies, the four bodies of sin, the bodies associated with the mortal vessel and the personality. People don't like change. We don't like change. We're creatures of habit. All of mechanical nature are creatures of habit, because if you're familiar with mechanicity, you look at the gears of a wristwatch. Once they're established, once they're set up, and you wind up that clock, the clock keeps ticking. The gears keep working and the clock keeps going and going and going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny. Still going. As long as it can get energy, right? It's going to keep on going, and it's not going to, a clock doesn't suddenly turn into a barometer. And a countdown timer clock doesn't suddenly turn into a stopwatch. We're talking about a mechanical one now with gears. We're not talking about digital. Digital is a different story, right? But even then, if you have the clock on your smartphone, you can set the clock on your smartphone, that app, you can set it to be a clock, you can set it to be an alarm, you can set it to be a countdown timer, or you can set it to be a stopwatch, and you can use any one of those things, but very rarely can you use multiple ones at the same time. All right, unless you're talking about a very elaborate watch that has the chronograph and the timer and the date and everything. It's all, those mechanical ones, Omega and Rolex, and they're very fancy and very expensive. Why? Because they have all those gears, everything set in. But still, the chronograph is the chronograph. The timer is the timer. The date is the date, and none shall they interfere with one another. That's mechanicity. Things like to do what they're designed to do. You design them once, you build them once, that's it. So that's inertia is built into the fundamental laws of mechanicity. And it's built into what we call habitual conditioning, conditioned behaviors, the programming that we are subjected to in our subjective experience. And we can really pare it all down, peel it all away, and get down to like this practical, experiential comprehension of the mechanicity of it all. Right? Once you set up a machine, you plug it in, you turn it on, it's going to keep doing the same thing. It was designed, it was engineered, it was manufactured, it was built, it was assembled, it was set up, it was turned on. And guess what? Now it runs. Now it does what it was designed and engineered and built to do until it breaks down and falls apart. Or until it runs out of energy. And then it just stops. So that is what we are filled with. And the cacophony of the mind and the consciousness constant being pulled this way and that way and every which way, and our energy constantly flowing down and out, is because all of the elements, all of the entities of mechanical nature are all vying for our human resources. Our attention and our sexual energy, the creative force. Because remember, all machines do something. They are purposeful. And all egos have a purpose. Now, that purpose might not serve us as individuals, might not serve the human being. Those egos, their purpose might only serve themselves. Like all parasites, their purpose is to take control and proliferate, to grow, to multiply, to take over, to siphon everything that they can from their host. And if possible, to take control of the host. Just like every machine is built for something. Machines in nature, these, are everything in mechanical nature is based on fear and lust. Survival of the individual and survival of the species. Those are the two primary fundamental purposes. And to accomplish those fundamental purposes, machines need resources. And the mechanical entities inside of us siphon those resources from us. And how do they get them? By and large, we give them freely away. It's all well and good to think about mechanical entities and parasites as siphoning off our energy unbeknownst to us. But let's be honest with ourselves, right? When you binge on junk food, when you eat an entire quart of ice cream, for example, or when you lose your temper and go on a rant tirade and tell somebody what's what, and let them have a piece of your mind, or when you look lustfully at a gentleman or at a lady, or when you someone cuts you off on the freeway and in your mind you curse them, or someone says something silly or awkward or confused or whatever, and then under your breath or in the back of your mind you say something sarcastic, or perhaps you say it to their face. These were not done without your approval. Sure, maybe the desire, the impetus, the impulse, the reaction is automatic and beyond your control, and that's fair. But remember, we've discussed the transformation of impressions and self-observation. And therein, in that precise moment by moment, when the thought arises, when the emotion arises, when the sensations arise, the mechanical, automatic, reactive impulses that seek our resources of our attention and our sexual energy. It's a temptation. That's what temptation is. Because remember, temp is the root word of temporary, meaning momentary. But temp is Latin, related to time, temporal, and interestingly enough, it relates to temperature. Temp, temporary, meaning momentary, meaning time. So it's temp, temps in French. Temp is time. So again, that momentary, temporary, moment to moment. So, and temperature obviously relates to that, because most likely the original meaning of temp was some form of gradation, some form of delineation, or scale. So like a time scale, like, so for example, seconds, we count seconds, but we count Celsius or Fahrenheit, the rising and the falling of temperature, the mercury in the thermometer. So there is this interesting relationship between temperature and time and temptation. Because the fire, the sexual force, is energy. That's one of our human resources that our egos, our mechanical entities, desire. That's what they seek. That's what they need to keep running. After all, they're machines. They need energy. They need to run. Keep in the back of your mind, just keep thinking about, a printing press or any other machine. If you've ever been in a factory and experienced these machines, we grew up, our father was a engineer and director of manufacturing. So, he worked in the needle trade, but they had their fair share of machines on an assembly line. And we had the experience several times in our life of being able to go to factories and watch big machines running. And our father always used to say to us, never stop a machine in mid-cycle, because you're doing all kinds of damage. Machines don't like to be stopped when they're running. Let the cycle complete, and let the machine complete its cycle and finish on its own, and then, open it up or do whatever you need to do. We would always get yelled at if we open the dryer. You know how it is. You load in the dryer and you turn it on and you walk away and then you say, "Oh, I forgot to put this, that, or the other thing into it." And you run back and you open the door, and the dryer stops and you can load it up, and you close the door again, the dryer, and then you have to start it up again. But machines hate that. It's really, really, that's a lot of wear and tear on machines, because machines are lazy and they're not designed to do that. They're designed to fulfill their cycle. And that's why when we're doing something mechanically and we're like really into it, and we're like kind of obsessive about it, we're really into it and we're going, right? We don't want to be interrupted. Someone comes along, says something to us, and we snap at them and, "Can't you say I'm busy?" Right? Because we're so focused on something, because most likely we're doing that thing mechanically. When we are conscious and we are light and we are fulfilled, we are in a state of fulfillment, we are flexible. We might really be into what we're doing, but because we are in a space of allowing, we're allowing our consciousness to be pulled here or there, not by the mechanistic egos, not by the thoughts in our mind, the busy mind, but in fact, our being, the being impulse to pay attention to this, to look over there, to look, right? It's a different form of concentration and focus. Next time you have an opportunity to meditate, see if you can put yourself in a place where you are meditating, where there is a high probability of being interrupted. It's an experiment. Prove it to yourself. Prove to yourself the difference between when you're focused and concentrated and working really hard and really intently, and maybe you're working on a deadline, and you're in the zone, and then someone interrupts you, and then immediately you go to anger. It's automatic reaction. Why? Because you're the dryer being turned. You're the dryer door has just been opened while it's in the middle of working, right? And machines don't like that. But if you're in a state of fulfillment of everything that we've talked about in the past few weeks, the connection is there, the oneness is there, the fullness is there, right? And the allowing is there. And like we were describing last week when we were cleaning out the bird cage, and we had this huge smile on our face despite the fact that we were suffering from clinical depression at the time, and nothing could disturb us. Like nothing could rattle us, because anything that happened was just part of the flow. It was all good. It was all good. It didn't matter what it was, good or bad. It was all good. And it was like effortless. We weren't doing, we were being done. We've used that expression how many times? Countless times. And so you can prove this to yourself. You can run the experiment. And if someone interrupts you doing something and you snap at them, aha, right? There's a sign, right? These are valuable clues, right? That we use in our self-observation, which of course, as we've described, is the first step of the AUM of Life. Because it's like the anti-malware software on your computer. It's the real-time monitoring of your machine. If you turn off real-time monitoring, all the other things that your antivirus does, that your anti-malware does, that it's all meaningless. It's all pointless. If you are not in a state, if you are not present and aware, one eye in and one eye out, observing yourself and observing the moment, if you are not in the moment, present and connected to that moment, and connected to what's going on in your human machine, if you're not monitoring that, then you don't know. Then you don't know what's controlling you. You don't know, is this thought coming from an ego, or is it coming from my being? So that self-observation allows us to notice. And when we snap, when we lose our temper, when we find stress in the body, we find like muscles tensing up, right? And we should be constantly scanning our body. And if we find that we're clenching our teeth or clenching our buttocks or making fists with our toes, or you know your body better than we do. So maybe you should know where you hold tension. So when you are in a situation and you find tension in the body, that's a clue. Because that tension, that requires energy. So there's an expulsion of energy there. There's a wasting of energy. Because yes, there are egos, there is malware that functions subconsciously, or they try to hide the fact that they're siphoning energy off of us, and that they're siphoning, and that they're hypnotizing our consciousness. So all of this comes into focus under this first factor of sacrifice. To let go of our habituation and conditioning by monitoring and observing and sacrificing our laziness in exchange for self-observation and self-remembering. That is, remembering our being, remembering our Divine Mother. It's a sacrifice of time. It's a sacrifice of conscious awareness, because allowing ourselves just to be ruled by our egos is laziness. And it's very comfortable. We can be just sitting, and like zoned out in front of the TV, for example, or just mindlessly, munching on some snack food in front of the TV and just being completely mindless, being completely hypnotized by what's on the screen. Or as we're indulging whatever we're indulging, whatever egos, whatever desires we're indulging in the moment. It's a sacrifice. And all the work that we do, because that also takes energy. But that energy is directed up and in when we are doing the transformation of impressions. When temptations arise, like the temperature arising in the mercury rises in the thermometer and the temperature going up, things are ratcheting up, right? We can feel that. For example, anger is the best. Anger and lust are the two best examples of this to observe in ourselves, right? We can feel the heat rising. We can feel the thermometer, the mercury in the thermometer going up inside of ourselves. In those moments, and we are being tempted to give in and let loose that energy and let it all out in however, according to whatever way those machines inside of us, those egos, that malware wants us to give into them, and that's how they're going to capture our energy and also our consciousness, our awareness, to hypnotize us. As Azil says, or whenever you listen to music, you can visualize the whole world as mechanical cogwheels. Whenever you listen to music, you can visualize the world doing that all the time. Depends on what kind of music you're listening to. As well, that the visualizing the world as cogwheels, mechanical cogwheels, is not the first thing that comes to mind when I'm listening to Mozart or Beethoven or music of that nature. But certainly, the mechanicity of the world is the first thing that comes to mind if any gangster rap or any pop, assembly line made music comes on the radio. That's the first thing that pops into mind, is the cogs in the world, and the big machine that pumped out this mass produced media, right? Just like the latest quote unquote content on the streaming services or whatever. It's just the machine like pumping out. It's like a printing press, right? Pumping out copy after copy after copy after copy. As also says, they also prevent us from being able to astral travel. So he's referring now to our egos. I remember when we were about to leave our physical body, and we were literally pushed back in by consuming our sexual energies. Well, that's absolutely true, and we can attest to that. We were given what we live with, the demon that we live with, which has the capacity to paralyze us. I mean, gives us seizures, right? Gives us the epilepsy. On one occasion, when we were projecting into the astral plane, we were ambushed, and we weren't prevented from entering the astral plane. We were ambushed and taken into the lunar astral plane, or we were being taken into the lunar astral plane under the arm of a demon, and using all of our will, because we were paralyzed, but using all of our willpower, we were able to turn and see the face of the demon. And it was very much like, we have a picture of it. We posted a picture on our article about facing the many faces of fear, and it was very much just like a classic gargoyle, right? There's a reason why gargoyles are on. The reason why gargoyles look the way they do, because and that's what a lot of people see or experience or interpret as reptilian. But so yeah, that's and uh, and why H.R. Giger now they're mechanical, right? They're mechanical, and H.R. Giger, his dark fantasy science fiction art captures this in this hauntingly beautiful way. Giger was able to communicate the biomechanical nature of, when we say mechanical nature, it's easy for us to say that, but when you go out in nature, it's so, I mean, the flowers, the birds, the bunnies, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, you, yes, it's all mechanical, but it's so fuzzy, furry, colorful, rainbows. It's, you know what I mean? It doesn't impress upon us what Gurdjieff called the terror of the situation. But H.R. Giger comes along, and with his artwork, he says, no, 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 no. I'm going to show you the real nature of biomechanicity. I'm going to show you the real nature of mechanical nature. And that's his xenomorph from Alien. But not just his xenomorph from Alien, but all of his artwork. And there are documentaries about H.R. Giger available on YouTube. And we highly recommend you watch one of them if you're not familiar with H.R. Giger's art. Because I know very often we Gnostics, we gravitate toward, for example, Joffre and Joffre's artwork. Now, Joffre's artwork, we're taking nothing away from the man who is a profound esotericist, and his artwork is absolutely transformative. But again, it's appealing to us, right? And what Giger shows us is sort of what Edgar Allan Poe wrote about, right? The dark side, the shadow, right? What we don't want to see or admit is the nature of nature, the nature of reality, the nature of mechanical nature, and the nature of our reality, its true nature, its essence, that cold, dark. That's why all of Giger's stuff is black and white. It's black and white because mechanical nature is black and white. And all of our egos are black and white, that binary. And like we discussed prior, that's the Black Lodge's, that's the purity that the Black Lodge seeks. The yes or no. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the global elite are so obsessed with the purity of bloodlines, and why all the royalty and everything have always been, and this whole thing of noble blood and being born of noble blood and being pure blood and all this purity on the level of physical nature. We talked about it, right? The fancy watches and stuff, like the perfection, the purity, the mechanical precision. And well, we were taken on a bit of a tangent there. So let's bring it back to another comment by Azazel, who says, we saw the form of our demon as well, but that would be NSFW content to share pictures of. Not. And Azazel says, Giger goes a certain respectable limit in that regard. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. But so, and the limit, but where Giger takes it is accessible. And why we think you use the word respectable there, and is that it's accessible, it's approachable, whereas the reality, as you have experienced, is less so. And frankly, all those horror movies which don't respect any limits, and they titillate and they indulge people's egos, they indulge people's demons. We never horror is the one genre of film which we do not partake in. Thank you very much. Yes, we watched The Pope's Exorcist with Russell Crowe, but that's not horror. That was like, psychological thriller crossed with religious thriller crossed with a true biographical story, is based on a true story. Yes, it was crazy over the top CGI at the end, which we could have done without, but Russell Crowe is very particular with the scripts that he chooses and the people that he chooses to represent, especially if he's dealing with real people, or whatever character he plays. You will notice that throughout Russell Crowe's career. I mean, he has made some extraordinary choices when it comes to the characters that he's played. But even then, The Pope's Exorcist was the first movie of that nature which we watched in decades, because we just do not we are not impressed by the horror genre. We think it's basically demon porn is what it is. I mean, that's what it is. And there is such a thing, and believe it or not, there's such a thing called demon porn in Japanese anime. And anime is also something that we have watched on occasion, and there have been certain anime that we've watched throughout the years, but they've been few and far between. And anyway, we're getting taken on a side tangent again. Okay. You might say that for those who do indulge and do enjoy their demon porn, or whatever the case may be, these are some of the things that we need to sacrifice. But simply put, it's our mechanicity that we need to sacrifice. And that sacrifice comes through the methodology of observation and willpower, so the power to resist the temptation and transform the impression, digest it consciously, and recognize the mechanical entity and what it was trying to do, and how it was trying to steal our energy, and how it was trying to hypnotize us, how it was trying to grab our attention, and how it was getting our attention, and how it was holding our attention and making us forget ourselves and identify with it and identify with what it wants. So we have to become like tinkerers of our own psychology in the moment, where, or at the, even if not in the moment, at the very least, we have to take a snapshot in the moment as we're being tempted, register consciously what is doing the temptation, what the temptation is, how it's trying to get our energy, and how it's trying to hypnotize us, and the circumstances around which were triggering that, and consciously be present and register as much information as we can with that snapshot. One eye in, one eye out. And then later in meditation, we can replay that experience. And now we can play the role of, you can think of it in one of two ways. We can play the role of Sherlock Holmes or Poirot, or what, Angela Lansbury, right? Murder, She Wrote, right? We can play the role of the detective, the forensic, or CSI, the forensic pathologist, or Sherlock Holmes, the detective, or Poirot, right, solving the murder. We can come at it like a detective that way. Or we can think of ourselves like a tinkerer, someone who gets a machine and starts taking it apart piece by piece by piece by piece to figure out how it works. And we want to take apart all the machinations that were taking place in that moment. And we want to disassemble and observe all the moving parts and how everything was, fit together. And then we don't do this intellectually, we do this consciously in meditation. So we're just observing, and we can play out over and over and over again without indulging any of the emotions, without spending any excess energy. We can just play out the scene over and over and over again, paying particular attention to the inflection points of how this piece fit into this, and then this happened, and that, and then that, and then that. And we comprehend the complexity of that mechanicity, and we await the moment of conscious comprehension where we go, aha, eureka. If you have ever taken something apart and not known how to put it back together again, struggled with it for hours to get it back together, to get it working again, and then all of a sudden you were sitting there staring at all the pieces, completely dejected, and you had given up, and you had lost all hope, and you're looking at it and you go, and all of a sudden it goes, it all just crystallizes in your mind. You're like, oh, that's it. That's what I was. That's it. And all of a sudden, and 5 minutes later, you put it all back together and it's working again. You were staring at the pieces there in front of you for an hour and nothing, right? But then all of a sudden, in this moment of clarity, it comes to you what you had been missing, and then all of a sudden, put this here, and that here, that, and oh, okay, all right, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes together. That is comprehension. That is comprehension. That is the moment that we're looking for in meditation. when we are doing retrospection on a temptation, on a moment in our day that was high drama, that was high temperature, right? Remember, in a moment that was high temperature, everything was cranked up, dialed up to 11. And we paid attention to that. We were in the moment paying attention to that. And then we don't have the time or the energy. We can't analyze it in the moment. So we analyze it later in meditation. And then when that comprehension comes, when it all comes together and you get it, you just get it. This flash of insight. Now you know how these egos were piecing together and working you, to siphon your human resources. Well, then now you've learned something incredibly valuable from the experience, and you've extracted from that mechanical entity valuable information, valuable knowledge. You've learned something having gone through that experience and having analyzed what was going on with that thing that you're full of. Now, in having made the sacrifice in the moment and after in meditation, remember we began all of this with meditation, sacrifice of time and energy and effort. With that comprehension, your Divine Mother can now eliminate that mechanical entity responsible, can eliminate that from your psyche. Why? Because you have extracted from it, you have gained the knowledge that you needed to gain. You've learned your lesson. You know something. You are a little wiser now. And that mechanical entity has served its purpose. Its purpose, that's your being's, its purpose related to your being. Yeah, its purpose was to get your energy and hypnotize you. Your being's purpose is, how the hell does it get my energy and hypnotize me? How can you know how something siphons your energy and hypnotizes you if A, it doesn't siphon your energy and hypnotize you, or B, you don't observe it trying to siphon your energy and hypnotize you, and C, you don't pay really close attention, take a snapshot in the moment, and then look at that machine in meditation and take it all apart to figure out how it works. Like taking apart a toaster, or like taking apart a lawnmower, or like taking apart an engine. This is really, really, really practical, down-to-earth stuff. And the reason why we are here experiencing this mechanicity inside of us, is precisely to comprehend, to understand how it is that mechanicity is able to do what it does to us. To put it another way, very simply put, we've all played with puzzles. We've all taken, we all know what a puzzle is. We've all taken puzzles, dumped out the pieces, and then we spent hours putting the pieces together to form the big picture. Why do we do that? Why would someone go through all the time and energy and sacrifice their time and energy to go through that? Because there's something of value at the end of it. There's something of value in the process. Now, the value you extract from, extracting a puzzle is, but when you solve a puzzle in your life, something which has been causing you grief and suffering, possibly for years, something which has caused a great deal of inertia, a great deal of habitual behavior, a great deal of conditioning, something that you have been subjected to and that you are a subject of. When you can solve that puzzle, but now you don't have to solve it anymore. You solved it. Your Divine Mother says, well, you solved it, good. On to the next puzzle. And that puzzle can be eliminated because you've extracted the consciousness that was bottled up and trapped inside of that puzzle. And that is death. That is psychological death. That puzzle, that machine, that's part of your human machine, your human mechanical psyche. That puzzle, that toaster, that engine, that, whatever mechanical machine thing, that malware, which, because you were doing your constant real-time scanning, you were able to recognize, hey, there's a malware at work here. And then in meditation, you spend hours looking at the code of that malware, and you're looking at what it was trying to do. It was trying to access the hard drive. It was trying to access the internet. It was trying to access my keyboard. It was trying to access my monitor. It was trying to get into my bank account. It was trying to do all these things. This malware is trying to do all this kind of stuff. And then in meditation, through your being, you have this divine database to compare the code in this malware against, and given enough time, like that analogy of looking at all the parts of the engine that you tore down, and you've been staring at those engine parts for hours, and then all of a sudden, boom, in an instant, in a flash, it all comes together, and all of a sudden you know how to rebuild the engine. For an hour, you've been agonizing over the fact that you don't know how to put it back together again, and then but if you stare at it long enough, it comes to you. That's comprehension and meditation. And when that comes to you, and you're able to put the pieces back together again, your Divine Mother says, congratulations, you passed the test. You learned what you needed to learn. You now know how to rebuild this type of engine. You don't have to do this again. This engine doesn't have to bother you anymore. And your Divine Mother can eliminate that engine, that machine, that malware. She can come in like anti-malware software that's identified the malware. It's identified what it is, what it was trying to do, and now it can clean it out of your system. And that fear, or lust or envy or whatever ego that you are working with from that particular level of the mind, that particular version of that particular ego can be eliminated. That doesn't mean that you're free of ego at that point. It just means that that particular piece of malware, you've gotten a handle on it, and you can be liberated from. And that's death. That's actual psychological death, because that machine is part of your ego personality. That's part of the mortal vessel. That's part of the human machine, that bit of malware. That's what it was infecting, right? Now, let's bring this back to emptiness and fullness. Remember what we said? We have to empty ourselves out. Now, we can empty ourselves out temporarily, okay, but we get filled up with all of our bullshit again, right? So the AUM of Life, and that first steps through self-observation and analysis and meditation, and we sacrifice this aspect of ourselves. for the sake of the knowledge which we gain through that sacrifice. There's always something to be gained from that sacrifice, but we don't gain that. We don't. The mortal vessel doesn't. The consciousness that is freed belongs to our being, our true self. The consciousness and the knowledge belongs to our true self, because the knowledge that we're looking for is not intellectual. It's not in our head. It's not in our mind. It's in our consciousness. It's conscious knowledge. We are sacrificing part of our mortal machine self in order to give our true self the currency of the supernal worlds, knowledge, experiential knowledge, and the consciousness which had been seized and hypnotized by that particular malware, by that particular mechanical entity. This sacrifice leads to death of that entity. And death leads to birth, the birth of our true self. So in alchemical terms, we are transmuting the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul. The true self, the higher self, is gaining when the mortal self, the false self, is giving up, sacrificing and dying for the sake of the higher self. This is the actual process. Sacrifice, death, and birth. And, that's why we say, don't worry about birth. Don't even worry about death. Put your focus and emphasis on the sacrifice part, because that's where the rubber meets the road in the three factors. Self-observation and self-remembering. And that's what leads to that slow process of reducing, right? Of emptying. And the more we empty over here, the more we get filled over here, because really you think of something that's split 50-50, let's say, and the more you move something over here, the more it's going to get full over here, because you're still dealing with 100%. So it's like a fraction, right? You're 97% ego, then you're 75% ego, then you're 50% ego, then 40% ego, then 30%, right? And then the less ego you are, the more conscious you are. That's what happens when you liberate consciousness from ego, from the machine. You got to sacrifice your mechanicity. You got to sacrifice the habituation, the conditioning, the automatic and reactive behaviors. You got to do that moment to moment. The temptations that are temporary, momentary. To deal with time and energy and your attention. And we have to go around the spiral many, many, many times, but it's a spiral, because every time we go down on the hero's journey, we go down into the dungeon. We should draw it this way. You go down into the dungeon, you defeat the monster that's down there, and you return and you come back, and you are a little bit higher from when you started, but then you got to go down. Now you're going to a deeper dungeon. You're going to fight a bigger, badder baddie, bigger, badder boss, and you got to go through a more elaborate level of the video game, of the labyrinth. And there you find that boss. You defeat that boss, and you come back up, and you're a little bit higher now, higher level, more experience points, right? You got more treasure, you got more loot, you got more magic abilities. You leveled up. But then you got to go down to the next deeper dungeon. And then you go fight more monsters, and you get more experience points and more more learning, in other words, by defeating those bosses. You come back and you leveled up, and now you're a little bit higher. This is Dungeons and Dragons. This is every video game. This is every role-playing game ever invented. We've talked about this endlessly when we talk about the AUM of Life. But the three factors, it's sacrifice, death, sacrifice, death, and birth. That's not birth, death, and sacrifice. Sorry, it just isn't. It's sacrifice first. Nothing in this world do you get for free. Nothing in this world comes for free. The very notion that something would come for free, we do not, and make no mistake, we're not trying to deride or belittle what any other Gnostic teacher has done, because the work of the Gnostic instructors at glorian.org is beyond reproach. They have dedicated their lives to the gnosis and to the gnosis of Samael and Bayor, and they know so much more than we'll ever know. And in terms of Gnostic instruction, they are light years ahead of us and beyond us. But, you know, we are all about the practical, where the rubber meets the road gnosis. And we are all about the actual metaphysical science, the controls, right? That what you and I and all of us can actually interface with, and what we can actually put our hands on when we talk about things like alchemy, right? So, and the AUM of Life is universal. You don't have to be a Gnostic to understand the AUM of Life. And you don't have to be an alchemist to understand what we've been talking about in our series these past few weeks, and what we're talking about today. To be fulfilled, all you have to have had is torn down an engine and rebuilt it with the flash of insight after staring at the parts for hours, not knowing where to begin and how to put it back together again, and holding your head saying, oh my God, I tore this thing down and I'm never going to be able to put it back together again. We are all about revealing the living, breathing Word of God all around us and within us. And you can be an atheist, you can be a mechanic, you can be a technical person, it doesn't matter who or what you are. If you have experienced taking something apart and putting it back together, and you could be a child who has made a puzzle, you can be a millennial or a Zoomer who's played a mobile game. Guess what? Then you know what the AUM of Life is. You've touched the meta paradigm at the heart of all phenomena. You've touched the how God is. The logos, how all being bees, how everything comes into being and how it comes out of being. In the reverse of that. That's what we are all about. And that's what fulfills us. And that's the job, the role that we are here to fulfill for you and for all. Not so that sins may be forgiven. That was Master Aberramento's, that's what he fulfilled. But so that sins, egos, the cause of our suffering, the cause of our separateness, can be utilized so that their purpose in our life can be fulfilled. That the causes of our suffering, that their purpose on our path can be fulfilled. Behind us are the pillars of Jachin and Boaz, the two T's in Attlas. That's a Tory gate, by the way. But they're the pillars of Jachin and Boaz. Masculine and feminine, positive and negative. Adam and Eve. And do you know what we learned just yesterday? That in Hebrew, Eve means beneficial adversary. Behind this Tory gate, you see nature. You see mechanical nature. That's all feminine. Our divine mother, be it our divine nature or mechanical nature, all nature is feminine. And the mechanicity that separates us, mechanical nature, which separates us from the fullness and oneness in the place of fulfillment, that has a purpose. And its purpose, if we are to empty ourselves and be filled with our divine nature, the purpose of mechanical nature must first be fulfilled. Do you see? The spiral of the AUM of life, we always begin at the top from a place of fulfillment. No matter where we are, what level of being we are at some level. That means a certain fulfillment has already been realized. We must descend into the dungeon of mechanical nature, of our own subconscious mind, of our own mechanicity, and we must seek to sacrifice what we find there. Through that descent, that sacrifice, we must seek to eliminate what we find there through comprehension. And that's that death that allows us to arise and achieve the birth of liberate the consciousness. That's a little birth. And sacrifice and death and birth and sacrifice and death and birth and sacrifice and death and birth. The sacrifice and death part could not be possible, would not be possible if we had no mechanical adversary, if we had no divine mother, if we had no beneficial adversary, if we had no Eve. If we didn't have two pillars. Without this Tory gate, there's nothing to pass through to get from where we are to where we long to be. Fulfillment is a process. It's not a destination. It's at the top and the bottom. Death and birth are both fulfillment. When an ego dies, it is fulfilling its purpose. And when we are born, we are fulfilling our purpose. To put that another way, when an ego dies, our mortal self is fulfilling its purpose. And when we arise and are born a little bit more, our higher self is fulfilling its purpose. And sacrifice is the way. Sacrifice is the way. Because the next level, of course, to all of this, the second aspect of fulfillment. All we've been talking about so far is fulfilling our purpose as mortal beings, right? In order so that we can be fulfilled, so we could be so we can empty out ourselves of our egos, and we can fill ourselves with our being. And then that being can fulfill its purpose. And how does it fulfill its purpose? How does our true self fulfill its purpose? By sacrificing, by giving. Sacrifice is the way. It is the factor of the three factors. Sacrifice is the way to fulfillment. There is no fulfillment without it. That's why it's first and it's last. Sacrifice, death, birth, sacrifice. Because self-actualization, self-realization of the being comes when we are able, as mortal vessels, we are filled and we are connected and we have that oneness with our true self. Now the gifts of our being can flow through us into the world, and the being can sacrifice now for the sake of others and all humanity and all beings. Sacrifice, death, birth, sacrifice. This is the AUM of life. This is that spiral. And the fulfillment that awaits us, well, we'll get to that. But first, DMJ 1738 says, brother, much love. Your awesome mindset consistency is key. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. Stay actively focused. Azazel says, it has run out its course much like a sprinter in a marathon. He says, those at Glorianne relates the aspect of birth to the foundation. If you waste sexual energy, well, good luck. You know what? We'll let your comment stand as it is. We are not. We're running out of time. We actually have a short amount of time left for today. It's going to be a shorter session today. We're not going to go 3 hours. Instead, we invite you to spend the third hour that we might normally have spent together listening to us yabber on and on and on about stuff, to meditate. But before you go do that, we have roughly half an hour, give or take. We're not going to discuss the specifics of how Glorian refers to the three factors and relating birth to the foundation and sexual energy and all that stuff, because we can't do it. We can't do them justice. We can't steel man them, and we will not straw man them. It's just the one thing is that always it didn't bother us. We shouldn't put it that way. It's just the three factors. We automatically and mechanically would tell people the three factors. Oh, it's birth, death, and sacrifice. It's birth, death, and sacrifice. Why? Because that's the way we heard it on Glorianne. But the three factors are not birth, death, and sacrifice. They are not in that order. It's sacrifice, death, and birth. It's the AUM of life. And knowing that and accepting that and practicing that in that order is essential to achieve fulfillment. And we don't think anyone should shy away from that fact, because fulfillment, it is better to know what our egos are truly here for, because so many people are trapped in the intellectualism of saying, no, 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 egos serve a purpose. Fear is important. Ambition is good. Greed is good. Like Gordon Gekko said in Wall Street, greed is good. And envy is good. If you envy what others have and you get ambitious and you want to get what they get and so on, it's good. It makes you, motivates you, blah, 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 blah. No, 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 no. No, no. These are all rationalizations and justifications to continue on as habituated, subjected, animal conditioned, mechanistic false self. Yeah, egos have a purpose on the level of mechanical nature for the intellectual animal, the mechanical entity, to be successful in the world. And egos have a purpose to get what they want. So, of course, egos make themselves useful to us because they're tempting us and they're hypnotizing us, because they need us. They need our willing participation. They need us to freely give our resources to them. So, of course, they make themselves useful. But their real purpose is what we already discussed. Their real purpose. To a mountain climber, why does the mountain exist? What is the mountain to a mountain climber? It's there to be conquered. Period. End of story. When you play chess, your opponent's pieces on the board are there to be taken. Period. You are there to win the game. There is no version of chess where you play not to eliminate and not to checkmate your opponent. Now, your opponent is your adversary, but not your enemy. It's a beneficial adversary, your opponent in chess. Why? Because the pieces on the board are ruthless. You can be having a conversation with your adversary. You can be joking with them. You can be playing chess in a cafe. You can be playing chess with your best friend, your lover, your spouse, your father, your grandfather, or your grandson or your granddaughter. You can be enjoying and playing a game of chess. But on the board, the pieces are ruthless. This is important to note. And why do they have to be ruthless? Because that's how your adversary, your opponent, makes you a better player. There's only one way individuals become chess masters, and that's by playing over and over and over and over again. And that's by being beaten over and over and over again, and paying attention to how they were beaten and analyzing the games that they played and seeing how they got into the place that they were in until they finally comprehend what they would have needed to do to not get beaten. And then the next time they play and they find themselves in that circumstances situation, they know exactly what to do. And they're no longer trapped by the Nismo Indian defense or the this opening or the Queen's Gambit opening or that opening or the King's Gambit opening or whatever. They're no longer sucked into the traps that they used to be, because they've analyzed and they've learned from their past mistakes. That's what a useful adversary does. And that's called experiential knowledge. And that's the purpose for all this mechanicity. And to become, to be born again, to be born as our innermost being, to fulfill that purpose, to be filled, to be one, to be connected, to be whole, and to get to that level where the being can then fulfill its role, its mission, its purpose in the world, which is like a whole other level. Azazel says it would take too long to make it justice. Yeah, true. And that's we're avoiding that. So plus we don't have, And Bugaboo says, maybe I don't understand English as well as I think I do. Some people say we should seek our creator out of love and not out of fear of hell. But that's true. But who's talking about fear of hell here? We're talking about going into hell. We're going about diving deep into your own subconscious, your own psychological hell, and face the monsters there. The biomechanical monsters in your own subconsciousness. You have to go into hell to face your own demons. Nobody's talking about fear. Nobody's talking about fear of hell. Not here anyway. Out there, what other people say, that's not our concern. We can't dedicate our time and our energy to debunking what everybody else says and what everybody else does. What we're talking about here is, as you eliminate mechanicity, you give birth to consciousness, and consciousness is the medium of love. Love comes through consciousness. So the more you can eliminate your mechanical egos and liberate consciousness, the more connected you will be to your innermost being, who is your own individual innermost essence of God. That's your own individual innermost source of love. Richard Valentine. Hello, Richard. Nice to have you back with us. And he says, and the Black Lodge have convinced us that we are playing against each other and not them. Yes, exactly. Divide and conquer. And always the enemy is out there. Notice when you play this game and when you observe yourself moment to moment, right? And you are tempted and everything else. And when your egos get triggered, you will notice how they are always trying to keep your attention away from them and on somebody else and on something else. So when somebody else triggers your anger, you don't blame your anger. You don't look at your anger. You look at them and say, how dare you do this? Like what we were saying earlier, when you were really focused and concentrated and somebody interrupts you and you snap at them. Can't you say I'm busy? I'm working on something here. Right? You snap at them. You're angry and you're blaming them. Why? Because the very egos that have had you in their grips and got you into that place of focused attention are diverting your attention away from them and to blame somebody else, to always blaming always because victims egos are the source of the victim mentality. Egos always paint the cause of, because they can only do what's true for them, and the trigger is their enemy. For an ego, what triggered them is the cause, right? Because it's just a machine. When people push your buttons, what that just simply means is that they're activating egos, and egos are mechanical. So if somebody pushes their activate button, it's like, how dare you push my activate button? That's that's what egos do. It's a machine. That's why egos only react. Mugaboo says, our teacher says, quote, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Don't fear anyone. So fear is not a valuable. I know that fear is not a valuable emotion to foster. Be aware, be conscious. And what they're talking about is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. That can only happen in the second death. And that's a topic that's way too big to get into today. It's not. We can talk about that another time, but we're talking about the second death there. And that's just formatting a hard drive to get rid of all the malware. And you don't have to, you don't fear that process. You lament. You want to avoid getting to a point where that's the only way that you can be healed of your egos, where mechanical nature will wipe you of all of your egos, but in doing so, it'll also wipe your soul clean, like formatting a hard drive to get rid of malware. Azazel says, those beings are indeed scary. And Magabu also says, as a servant, I seek to, so I'm not sure which beings you are referring to as being scary. Magabu says, as a servant, I seek to please my creator. I have a level of fear and respect. I seek to maintain my union with my divine mother. Again, we're not sure what you mean by fear. Maybe again, Magabu, it may be a language issue, but fear is not your friend. Fear is not, your creator does not want you to fear him. In no way, shape, or form. This whole God-fearing stuff, it's you shouldn't fear, because that is precisely what gets in the way of the sacrifices that we need to make. Richard Valentine, the outer blame game. Yes, that's the victim mentality, and that's the modus operandi of all mechanical nature, right? Because it's cause and effect. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? That's the law of mechanical cause and effect. Again, coming back to Newton's laws. Benjamin Ochoa says, plus, that's kind of the point of Gnosticism. You'll never beat its, so to speak, teaching its practical. Yeah, it's the point of Gnosticism to be practical. And that's why we teach the AUM of Life. And that's why we teach what we teach and how we teach it, where the rubber meets the road. We guarantee you, as you progress on the spiral and as you progress on the three factors of sacrifice, death, and birth, you will expand your consciousness, and you will become more aware and more capable of going and seeking out all sorts of other information, whether in meditation or study or esoteric study, etc. And there are so many more resources and gurus out there who have written books and have countless books, and there's countless hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of lectures, and you can go and you can study all the esotericism you want. Okay? But we feel that's putting the cart before the horse, going out and studying all that esotericism without understanding the AUM of Life and practicing the AUM of Life. First and always, the foundation where the rubber meets the road, we must be infinitely practical. And what you do on your own time as a hobby or as a study of esotericism and all the wonderful things that might happen in this degree and that degree and the other degree, more power to you. We studied it, and we encourage you to study it, but we don't teach it. We teach need to know information. What you need to know and what you need to practice, what you need to do. Azazel says, those able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Oh, yes, but there's no entities that are able to do that. No, that's not what they're out to do. They're out to possess. Entities are out to possess. There's no entities that are out to destroy both body and soul and entity, except those who have been marked for the second death. And as Attlas says, we've encountered beings that are immensely powerful to torment one's soul, and thus it affects the body. But indeed, fear is not the way facing such encounters. So tormenting souls, possessing souls, there's all sorts of things entities do, but destroying souls is not one of them. Souls are too valuable. Souls are too valuable. All right, we have a few minutes left. And what, remember we said that it's sacrifice, death, birth, and sacrifice. And the reason it's that, because we eventually get to a place of fulfillment where our being is able to fulfill his mission, his purpose, his reason for being through us. And so rather than we've I guess you've experienced a part of that by being here on our live streams. Oh, there's another comment. Quick, well, we're gonna. Richard Valentine says, "I've always found that the explanation of the lesson always comes after I've suffered and failed it many times. The esoteric knowledge is a bit like reading the teacher's manual and thinking you've passed the exam. The exams just become harder." There is a real risk of esoteric study, which results in academic, intellectual Gnostics, mental Gnostics, Gnostics who can rhyme off scripture and can quote Samuel Anvayor, and they know all the principles and they know everything there is to know about alchemy, and they can tell you every tarot card and what it means. They can tell you every astrological sign, and on and on and on and on and on it goes. And they study ancient languages, and on and on and on and on and on it goes. But if they don't practice what we're talking about here and now, and what we've been talking about in this series, then they will never be fulfilled. It doesn't matter how much they stuff themselves with esoteric wisdom. The first step to this process is emptiness. You got to empty all that stuff out. If you go into meditation thinking about alchemy and thinking about this and thinking about that and thinking about the Hebrew alphabet and thinking about the tarot and thinking about astrology and blah, 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 if you go into meditation with all that, you're getting nothing out of meditation. You're not going to get anything out of your meditation. And if you approach the three factors, birth, death, and sacrifice, believing that birth is the first step, you're going to get nowhere, because sacrifice is the first step and the last step, because sacrifice is the path to fulfillment, because sacrifice leads to death, which leads to birth, which leads to sacrifice, which leads to death, which leads to birth. It's a spiral. It's the AUM of life. It's the ultimate methodology. It's the methodology of methodologies. So that's why you don't have to be a Gnostic to be here. You just have to live your life and be aware and awake. And we're teaching you how to read the living, breathing word of God that's all around you, and in everything that you do, and in everything that you face, in every single moment. Every temporary, every moment, every temps in French, in Latin. That's what it's all about. As Azza says, thank you for today's stream. We have a few more minutes, and we want to share with you one thing related to fulfillment. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the first to see this. This is our website. As you know, that we've been working on our book, and this is a work in progress. So by all means, don't consider this as the final. Here. Don't consider this to be the final version of this by any means, but what you're witnessing here is these an important step in the fulfillment of our mission, of Atlas's mission, of our purpose for being. And we are only here now showing you this. We were only able to do this and everything that this represents because we have gone through the process. We followed the methodology that we're teaching you here. And we've gone through the process that we've been talking about for these past 7 lectures, including today. Speaking of books, this webpage is also more or less finished, although there's still work to be done on some of the language and text. I mean, that's going to change, but generally speaking here, we have our first book, our upcoming book, which is represented here on the, and then when you scroll down, okay, there's this kind of a description, right? Actually, we can click here and it'll scroll more nicely. And we've taken a couple quotes from some of the some comments on our website and our blog and YouTube, and we'll eventually put actual reader quotations and stuff here, like instead of in our testimonials. But then the next book, following our next book is going to be, or another upcoming book. We're not sure exactly if it's the next one or if we'd have to do the AUM of Life next, but this is about fear. This entire book is going to be focused on fear, and it's going to be a much shorter book, and it's going to be based on our blog, article about fear, which needs to be fleshed out and expressed. But so you can get a sense of what this next book is going to be about by reading that article. So this will be, and then if we scroll down, we have our little blurb talking about, saying what the book is about. And again, we have some sort of testimonials that we have related to that article. And then we have a quote from Bill the Butcher. So again, some of this stuff is temporary. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, you get our first book that we wrote, The Atlas Project, Part 1. This is already available, so people can order it. And then we have what readers actually said about that book. So we just shared this with you to show you that we can so yeah, the AUM of Life, the AUM of Psychology. Okay, so this is, these are the things that we talk about, right? AUM and AUM in life and in work, and that all is AUM, and that AUM is how everything comes into being. Oops. So this is still a work in progress. But we just wanted to show you this as to wrap up today's talk on fulfillment, because you know my initials are ALL, and this statement, all is AUM, how it all comes into being, how all, so this is a double entendre, it's a pun, it's very personal to me, how I came into being. Who's the being? Being is Attlas. And all is AUM. All looks, all light, all AUM. All is AUM. So Attlas AUM. We could very easily call ourselves Attlas AUM. We are a living embodiment of fulfillment. You are witnesses. Each and every week, you come here and you experience the truth of that. The truth of what we are just showing in words and in images on a website here, you've experienced it firsthand. Now, take what we've shared with you, take what we've given to you, take what we ourselves have used to get to where we are, and apply it. Apply it in your own life. Pass through the Tory gates within yourself. We promise you what awaits you on the other side of that gate will be beyond your imagination. We want to thank you for joining us today, and we want to thank you for being with us for this series and arriving at where we've arrived at. And where we go from here, we have a field of wide open possibility, a wide open opportunity. As Azil says, quite a cool concepts, having quotes from comments. Benjamin said the website looks absolutely stunning. Congrats. Thank you, Benjamin. Richard Valentine says looks great and so needed. And Stuart Wilson says thanks all. You're welcome. And thanks to all of you for being here and all of you supporting us. And on that note, you can actually help us in our fulfillment as we move forward. If anybody would like to contribute some kind of a testimonial, by all means, you know how to contact us. We're not that hard to find. You can send us a comment through Facebook. You can leave a comment on one of our videos on YouTube. You can leave a comment on one of our blog posts. It doesn't matter. Or you can just email us. We now have an email, all, which, you know what? All at atlasalex.com. There's our email. We also have a You scroll right down to the bottom. Okay, so we have contact us here at the bottom. There's our email address. Well, actually, we got to change that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. If you use this contact form on the website, it would help if we showed it to you. If you use this contact form, it'll get to us. Send us an email if you want to send us some kind of a testimonial, and we might, we'll make some changes to it and we'll run it by you, and then we'll put it on the website. What else can we need to add? So, and when the book is available for pre-order, if you want to contribute, if you want to help us in some way, then it would be helpful to us if you left a review of the book on Amazon. But we'll get to that. We have time for that still. So the book is not. It hopefully will be. Hopefully, it will be available for pre-order soon, and that's one of the reasons why we needed to get this website online. And of course, like and share and all that good stuff. That always helps. But what will really be important when the time comes is that if you can take some time to read the book and leave a review on Amazon. We won't tell you to leave a positive review. You can leave whatever review that you would like, but any review is better than no review. So that's but again, we will jump off that bridge when we get to it. But all of this is part of the fulfillment of our life's work. And so we wanted just to show you where we are at with that, and that we're really only just getting underway. We're really just beginning. And so it's never too late to begin. It's never too late to begin working with the AUM of Life. Does anybody have any comments or questions or anything related to the series that we just wrapped up? And Jennifer says, "Thank you for your message today." You're more than welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for being here as always. Our message today, again, just brings back to this series that we've been working on, that we've been getting at. We started with it's really a short message today. It's not complicated. Whether it's to be fulfilled as a vessel, or to be fulfilled as an innermost being, sacrifice is the way. Azazel says, "Driver, follow that project." Stuart says, "Gratitude. I'm so glad to have come across you and this series. Aum to the power of all." Oh, beautifully said. Beautifully said. Benjamin, does sacrifice reveal your faith? Obviously, because faith is not belief. Faith is experiential knowledge. So when you sacrifice what's illusory, you gain what is real. This is another, we will get more into this perhaps next week. I think we will cap off this series, and now we will get into some of the nuts and bolts, the metaphysical nuts and bolts of the relationship between mechanicity and reality, what's illusory and what's real. But if you sacrifice the illusion, what you are left with is what's real. And what's real, you can only know through experiencing it. And when you have experiential knowledge, when you know intimately through direct conscious experience, then you can give faith. Then you can testify. You can't testify until you witness. Believing something doesn't make you a witness. That's bullshit. That's not faith. That is bullshit. It's an illusion. It's hypnosis. Believing something. No, you have to witness. That's what we're here helping you to do. That's what the AUM of Life, that's what the 3 factors of sacrifice, death, and birth avail you. They send you on the intrepid journey into your own psychological hell so you can witness what H.R. Giger is painting in all of his fantasy art about the biomechanicity of nature and the reality of that. And when you witness, when you've taken apart the engine, right? And you comprehend how it all works and it all comes back together again, now you know how the engine works. Now you know. You've done it. You've torn it down and you put it back together again. You have that working knowledge of how that engine works. Now you can give faith. Now you can testify. It means this is how you are faithful to the source of consciousness within you, which is your innermost being, which is your innermost essence of God. That's true faith. That's true faith. Benjamin says, thank you for that wonderful answer. Now I know what the allegory of Abraham sacrificing his son is. Sacrificing all the illusions and the reality will appear before you. And Abraham's sacrifice is of his own flesh and blood. Right? Abraham's son is an allegory for his false self. That which is most precious to him. His ego, his I. Now at the end, God stays his hand because guess what? God needs that vessel. Right? At no point in today's talk of fulfillment, or this series, which led to fulfillment, even though we were talking about sacrifice, death, and birth today, at no point did you hear pass our lips about killing the mortal vessel. We were not talking about physical death. You see, Abraham is the soul. Abraham is the soul, the being. God is Alux, all light, God light. God speaking to Abraham is Alux speaking to Attlas. And Attila, this mortal vessel speaking to you, is necessary, is required. But Alux gives Attlas the purpose of eliminating Attila. But not his physical vessel, but just the I, the egos. So when you look at Atlas project, for instance, look at Atlas project. If you look at Attila's project, and you take the I and the apostrophe out of Attila's project, you're left with Atlas project. We'll show you that. Atlas project becomes, when we eliminate the I and the apostrophe, the ownership, all right? When you eliminate the I, the ego, and the attachment, so the sacrifice must be made. That's why God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son, Isaac. And isn't it interesting that Isaac is I? Isaac needs to be sacrificed. And then you will show that you are worthy, Abraham, to represent me, Alux, God, to be a representative of God on earth. See, Attila must die psychologically so we can be here as Atlas, here and now, doing the work of Alux. But in the Bible, when Abraham's about to stab Isaac, that's an allegory for suicide. And God says, no, 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 no. He stays Abraham's hand at the last moment. He says, no, 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 no. You don't actually commit suicide. It's the way what's the way the allegory was written. What can we tell you? We're not gonna dwell on it too much because already our time is running. We're over time today. But you get the point, Benjamin. You know where we're coming from. And the sacrifice then, Benjamin says, it is so funny that Isaac also sounds like I suck, or the ego sucks. We didn't, you know what? We hadn't considered that, but I suck. Yeah. You know what? You're right. It does. But you can also say I sack, right? Isaac. Now Zach, it's like a bag. It's a weight. It's a burden that we carry, right? What's a sack? What do you put in a sack? A sack is filled with stuff. It's all of our baggage, right? So our eyes are a sack, a bag, a burden, all of our baggage, right, that we carry around with us. And God says, you know what? Take that knife and sever and cut that sack. Cut that sack of eyes, that eye sack. Because we don't have one eye. We have a sack full of eyes, right? We have lots of egos, lots of eyes. So an eye sack, we have a bag of eyes inside of us, and we're full of that. That's what we're full of. And go all the way back to the beginning of the series after meditation, the second lecture in the series after meditation. And what are we talking about? Emptiness. To empty out yourself, to empty your sack of eyes. And what do you do? What do you need that for? You can take a knife and you cut the sack open. You let all the eyes drop out of the sack and empty yourself. Or you cut the sack open and you empty out the sack of eyes so you can fill it with Abraham. So you can fill it with Abraham. And if Abraham sacrifices Isaac, then he is worthy of being a messenger and a servant of Alux, messenger and servant of all light, of God's light, the Logos. Any other questions or comments before we bid you farewell on your quest to achieve fulfillment, fulfilling your role as the mortal vessel and fulfilling so that your innermost being can fulfill his role? Benjamin says, thank you for today's breadcrumbs from our Divine Mother. God bless your work, sir. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for being here, as always. And Stuart Wilson says, I had no idea how much I needed to hear this now. Well, it warms our heart that serendipity has touched you today. And that, like Benjamin here, he mentions the breadcrumbs, that your Divine Mother led you here today. Anyone else? Richard says, thank you for all you do. You're welcome, Richard, as always. Thank you for being here. Thank you, all of you, for being here, because at the end of the day, you help us fulfill our work. You are the reason why we're here. I mean, obviously, we're not here for, and yeah, what can we say? Thank you, and the best is yet to come. We're only just getting started. We're only just getting started. So, if there's nothing else, we want to thank you all once again for being here, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, take care, and as always, inverential peace. God bless. We'll see you next week.